in this session, we're going to be placing some beams to make for the framing of the project. So for a project's framing, usually when you go take a look at the AutoCAD file, you will definitely find some sheets or plans which are named for the framing. So as you can see over here, we've got these framing plans using the beams, which is also giving us the different types of beams we need to use. And then on the side, we've got some of these sheets which show us these beams profiles. So you can see that the different types are drawn over here in detail, and we've also got their profiles by which we could identify the dimensions that we need to use. That will help us create them in our project and finally place them. So like before, we're going to go ahead to the second basement and start with the framing. And if we take a closer look at its plan, we can see that, for example, this beam that is placed over here, its type is called BP14. Then you can see that it is repeated in a line all the way here. Now this one's BP20, so this way we can understand we've got some different types. Now these yellow lines here are actually the beam lines, and the dashed line is the axis. And overall, the beams are not that complicated to operate. In fact, the process of their placing is very much similar to placing the columns. Like what we did for the columns was that first we had to create the different types that we needed to use in the project. As in, we went to the AutoCAD file and took a look around to observe the column types we needed. As you can see down here, we've got the column sheets. And these sheets actually helped us understand the dimensions we needed to use, the profiles, after which we created the types and placed them. Now the exact same thing goes for the beams as well, where we're going to have to create the different types of beams according to the sheets we've got, and then place them. So if you would agree, let's go ahead and start. I'm going to go over here and open the -2 floor plan so we can begin with the framing. We're going to start from down here. And so the first thing we said we needed to do was to create the different types we need for the project. You could also start from one point of the project, then create and place the different types of beams as you go, or you could start by creating all the types you need for this one level, and then begin with the placing. In other words, you could just go over here and take a look around your sheets to see which types are needed, make all of them first, and then start to place them. It doesn't really make any difference, but I prefer to first create all the types I need for this level, and then place them. Okay, so starting from down here, we saw that this type placed here is BP14. So I'm going to go over to the AutoCAD plan, and I'm going to find beam BP14. It's probably inside this sheet, and here it is. As you can see, we've got a profile of it, and another profile here, by which we can understand the beam's dimensions. This one is actually a 60 by 70 beam, so it's pretty simple. We're going to go over to Revit, go over here, select beam, and just like always, first we're going to have to duplicate its type. We're going to give a suitable name to the duplicate, which can also include the dimensions. Now, in case you didn't have this beam family, as in if you didn't have it in your template by default, you can always load one. You could download a family from online and load it into your project. But the thing is that in Revit's later versions, after 2022, Revit has removed its library because pretty much all of Revit's downloadables are online. You do know that before, when we were installing Revit, we could also have some default families going into the library after installation. But that feature is gone now in versions later than 2022. So in case you have some older versions of Revit installed on your PC, you could use one of their default families and use them in your current projects. The older versions still have them. They have metallic beams, as well as the concrete ones. Now, in this 2025 version, if you go over to the Structure tab and select Beam, you might find some beams already loaded into your template. Like you could find some metal or concrete beams. So in Revit's default templates, we've already got some default families. So let's say if you select the Door command, then check out its Types menu, you could find some default door families in the template. So we've already got something to work with, but in case you were looking for something that you didn't have in your template by default, and because we no longer have the families library, we can always go and download a family online. The beams are actually pretty simple and you can find them anywhere. So let's go to Edit Type, then duplicate it. Let's also give it a suitable name. First we put in the name of the project, followed by the beam type, and we could also add the size. So click OK, and then we could go over here to these parameters to readjust the dimensions of the beam. Now also, if you turn on the preview here, you will see exactly how the values you put for your parameters will change the beam and how it'll look. Now this doesn't apply to only this element, so if you were ever working with a new family and you weren't sure about its parameters, you could turn on its preview. And in case you still couldn't see how the parameters are changed in the family, you could also go over here to switch between all of these views. Some parameters or changes may not be visible in certain views, so you're just going to have to switch between them. So I'm going to change this one to 60, and I'm going to put 70 for this one. Then click OK. And it's as simple as that. We can go ahead and continue creating all the other types we need for the project, and then place them. Now I could also proceed and place the types I'm making as I go, like we have BP14 here, then go to the other types, create, and place them. So for now, I'm just going to create all the types I need for this level, because it's not really hard to make the types, and they won't take much time. And we've also just made one together. So now I'm going to go on and create all the other types I need for this level of the project, and then we're going to come back and place them. Alright, so I've created all the types I needed. And now we're going to go ahead and place them together. So first I'm going to go over here, select beam. And as you can see here in this drop down menu, I've created all the types that were needed. And all that's left for us to do is place in them. So let's begin. First we're going to go over here and adjust the reference level. We need to make sure that this is the first thing we do. And we could actually readjust it later. But it's best to do it before placing the beams. Because even if we try to do that after the beams are placed, we would need to also change the work plane. So in the first step, I'm going to set this to basement 2. And you know the drill. We could go over here and start drawing, but only remember that beams are drawn by their axis. So if I draw from here, as you can see here, the beam will be drawn on the grids and this one will be here. If you're not sure where the grid is, you can grab pick lines, and then you're going to pick these lines over here. I'm going to try both ways. So for example, I'm going to start drawing from here all the way to this side. And then we're going to go from here all the way to here. And another one starts at this point and ends over here. There we go. Now let's also try something. I'm going to assign a color to these beams. Only note that the beams that you're drawing from here, they're actually not cut. So don't make the mistake of assigning a pattern to the cut, because right now we're viewing these beams from the top and we are seeing their surface. So now I'm just going to go over here and assign a pattern and color to the beam surface. For example, I'm going to grab this orange color, or you could choose any other color that helps you recognize the beams. And as you can see, this is how they will turn out. Now let's go place the other types. For example, here we've got BP3. And we're going to place that type as well. So we're going to start from here, then go all the way up, and end at this point. Now also, it's fine if your beams go past the columns, because they're both concrete elements, and you know that the concrete elements will be merged. So essentially, if for example we draw all the way past this column, that'll be totally fine. For example, I could zoom in over here, select this one, go to pick lines, and let's say I'm going to be drawing from this line. Press the tab key and it'll be drawn. Now as you can see, it's going all the way to the end of the line, and that's okay because all the beams in this line are BP3. So we're going to also need to trim this part because we drew on the grid. So I'm going to drag it down by the end and bring it over here. Now if I go over to the 3D view, then you will see it better, and you can see how the beams and the columns are merged together, and therefore there won't be a problem if they go over each other. Now let's stretch the side, and here they are. So basically there's nothing extra you need to do, or you don't even need to join them, because eventually those two will be merged together anyway. And this will be the result. So that way we could go ahead and continue drawing all the other beams, and you've also just witnessed that it's not that complicated to do. So I'm just going to go over here and place all these types one by one, and I'm going to also fast forward through this part of the video so you can still see how they are placed, and we will pretty well be done. It's not really very complex, but for example, for parts over the stairs and the ramps, where you're gonna need to match the beam slopes to those stairs or ramps, then you will have to apply some slope to the beam, and even doing that isn't very hard. But as for replacing these simple straight beams over here, they're actually pretty easy, and it shouldn't have any problem. Okay, so let's draw the beams over here. This one's type is supposed to be BP3, and now we're going to redraw those beams the same way we did the previous type. Like so. Now something you need to always keep in mind is that all concrete elements will be merged together. So in case you ever have any beam that is slightly interfering with a column, that's actually fine and it won't create any problems. That's because they're both concrete and they will be merged. So you don't need to do anything about it, like you don't need to drag your beams backwards, you don't need to split them, and essentially there's nothing that you 100% need to do. So don't worry about it, just go ahead and continue. So now I'm going to go over here, select another type, and draw it like so. Now the placement of the main beams isn't very complicated or hard. All you need to do is to just create the different types that you need for your project, and then you're going to place them. Therefore, I'm just going to fast forward at this point while I finish the framing of this entire level. Then we're going to come back and I'll show you the finished result of all the framing done in all levels. Alright, so I finished placing all the beams I needed for this level. And if we also go take a look in the 3D view, then we can see exactly what they look like. So do you see that? This is the framing of the level and these are the beams that we've placed in this level, and just basically placing the main beams is pretty easy. Now you might wonder that if we go over here and select the beam command and for example have it on grid lines, what would happen and why didn't we just do that in the first place? You could probably guess the answer, which is because the types of beams we have here differ from one another. So for instance, if I try to draw a beam on a grid, it should be of one single type. Then I will have to come back and switch the types to their correct ones, and it's actually fine to do so. There's nothing wrong with doing that. For example, if you take a look over here, you can see that all the beams on this grid are BP8. So for example, we could have just drawn over this part and placed all the BP8s, or we could place all the BP9s. And basically what I'm trying to say is that there are different ways of placing the beams. So it's not like anything that comes to your mind is absolutely wrong, but essentially you're just going to have to go with what speeds up your process. So for example, maybe it would have been easier if I had used on-grid lines to place these beams. But I don't really feel that's the case because you're going to have to come back and change your types and just keep selecting, and you might make some mistakes. But I prefer to do what I did, as in I was more comfortable drawing them by myself, and it's not like one of the ways would take more time than the other. So the reason why we didn't do that was because of the difference in the beam types. Now in this project over here, we do have some beams of the same types, even though there are some different ones, like as you can see here, we've got this BP24 and BP16. So we can't go with on-grid lines here, but you could use on-grid lines and place all the beams in one level, then go back and change their types. So there is another way to do it. Thus, we were able to place all the beams we needed for this level, and here's the result. And now I'm going to also show you the complete version of all the beams placed in all levels. So this right here is actually the finished result of all the beams placed in every level in the project. And so the framing of this project is done up to this point. We've placed the structural walls as well as the columns, and now we've also finished the beams.